name is Ajay Iyer. I'm the senior technical architect for modern work and security based out of the St. Louis Microsoft Technology Center. I'm assuming you all are from St. Louis, but if you haven't heard of our facility, it's based in the Cortex area, right by IKEA. So that's our new facility. So I work out of that location. Well, I used to. Now I'm working from home. I try to be somewhat active on Twitter, posting stuff. If you want to follow me, that's my Twitter handle right there. And our session today is basically around trying to figure out with Teams, right? Teams can do a lot of things, and people are starting to use Teams for different app integrations, doing Power Apps, as we just talked about, things like that. But what we're starting to see a shift is to say our customers are asking us, well, what more can I do with Teams, right? So one of the things that I'm increasingly seeing just in my own customer interactions is a need for some kind of first level support, right? I have a help desk team that's, we all know, gets overworked. So how can I do some kind of automation there so that those folks don't have to slog away and they can focus on other things too and do some kind of automation, right? So there are many ways to solve that problem, right? Depending on your ticketing system, whether it's ServiceNow or something else, everybody has their own chat flavor to it. But kind of like the point that I think, Roger, you were making earlier, what can I do with things I already own, right? I already own Teams. Can I have something that Teams can do for me? And that's where this comes in, where you can start looking at building a chatbot instead of Teams, right? I'll just say this, by the way, I'm not a developer by any stretch of imagination. I wouldn't claim to be, and I would, if I had to do it, I'd be horrible at it. But that's the beauty of the solution, is that it's a layered piece of this puzzle that you can, and I'll get into some of that architecture, but you can start with absolutely no code to get a chatbot in its very basic level running, up and going, right? And that's kind of what I want to cover. Obviously, we can, there's more to this, and I'll let you all know what that is, but we won't get into that piece of this. So where we're going with this, right, is, in fact, before I do that, let me switch to a PowerPoint deck that I wanted to cover a couple of things. So when it comes to Teams, right, I'm just going to do a quick overview of the types of customization that are actually, in fact, available to you today that you can start thinking about, right? And I'll tell you where our discussion today fits in. So if you think about this, with every Teams piece of this, right, there are two components. There's the interface, right? There's the backend component, which is where things are running, and then there's the UI, right? How am I interacting with all this? So it's the idea that, let me pull up my laser pointer here. It's the fact that you're living here, right? You now have access to all of these six different components to have them interact with your backend application itself. That application could be anything. That application could be Service Desk, or ServiceNow, I mean, could be Trello, could be Jira, could be Confluence, could be Sharp, could be whatever you want it to be, right? You have some flexibility there, but from a team standpoint, you're looking at 6 different ways of having your team's environment interact with this app. And the way it works is everybody's familiar with tabs, right? I have a team, I have a channel, each channel can have tabs, pretty straightforward. I can build custom tabs for my existing customization. So if I have a custom app that I want to present inside of Teams, tabs is definitely one way to go. And tabs is probably the most common way of doing any kind of customization. Bots, that's the second one. Now bots, also people are familiar with it, but I haven't been seeing as much traction with it until lately, to be perfectly honest. Adaptive cards, another very popular one that people are aware of, but are not doing enough of it, in my opinion, at least. Messaging extensions, task modules, and notifications. Now, these 3, I don't think many are actually aware that you could even do these things. So messaging extensions, right? So if you think about this, right, when I'm in the Teams client and I am typing up a new message, a new conversation in a channel, and that WYSIWYG editor that I get in the bottom, right, when I'm typing up the message, I can add buttons there within that editor. those are called messaging extensions. So depending on what app it is, if the context makes sense, I can actually put my customization there too with my third-party application. I've seen that happen with customers who have, let's say, Cisco WebEx in their environment, and they need to, post a message that should generate a Cisco meeting invite, let's say. Put that as an extension. The extension automatically generates the invite. There it is, that kind of stuff, right? So there are many ways to approach that as well. Task modules, notifications. Think about, if you all are familiar by now, I'm sure, the Yammer app, right, that we announced for Teams. One of the big things that I like about the Yammer app is the fact that now I have native notifications from an external application inside of Teams. So how can I have applications of my own third-party apps or in-house apps that we built? How can I use those apps to generate notifications instead of Teams? That's another aspect of customization that you can do, right? So that's essentially the high-level kind of framework of things you can do with Teams ultimately as a platform, right? That's that next level in the maturity curve after you've been fully deployed in Teams, right? So I just wanted to quickly call out this little slide, and I will get back to the whiteboard here. So for our conversation today, it's going to be about bots, right? In that slide deck over there. So the way we see bots working with Teams, right? It's essentially something like this. At the end of the day, it's using the Azure Bot Framework. That's the underlying foundation for anything you do with regards to chatbots, right? In this solution, at least. With regards to what we're trying to solve, right? Let's say the use case is I do in fact have a internal service desk application, and my service desk team has created this knowledge base, basically a Word document, right? That's their internal repository of the typical frequently asked questions that I get as an organization, right? That people ask me about, how do I reset my password, or how do I request a new PC, or how do I request access to this application? I get an access denied, blah, 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 so on and so forth. For the most part, those questions, you kind of know that these happen all the time. And so you create a knowledge base so that others can leverage those answers to do their jobs. But that's where, when you see those kind of use cases, you should think automation, right? So what we've got is, inside of our Microsoft ecosystem, we have this thing called as a Q&A maker. All it is, and I'll pull up the website, we'll actually walk through the whole process. What you're doing there is you spin up this instance. It's a resource to spin up in Azure, so it requires an Azure subscription, right? So this piece of it is not part of your Office 365 license, but in the grand scheme of things, this is a very trivial cost, right? If you pull up Azure Calculator, you'll actually see that this costs literally dollars per month, if that, like maybe $10 per month, something like that, right? Pretty low. Actually, Bill, we didn't start recording, did we? Oh, you started recording, never mind. It's still an Azure subscription, right? But when you spin up a Q&A maker service instead of Azure, the first thing it does it asks you to create a knowledge base. Now, in that knowledge base, you basically define, how do I populate this knowledge base, right? That knowledge base could be a Word document that you've already created in the past. Could be a PDF that, again, you created in the past. Could be an internal website, like a SharePoint URL that you have been using in the past for storing information about your typical FAQ stuff. Or, depending on the use case, it could also be an external public-facing website that you have as an organization. So think about, I have an internal, we have our own website that manages FAQs, and I want to expose that data, that information and have my users interact with it in the form of a chatbot. So you can actually even point it to an external facing website as well. And the whole point of a Q&A maker is to actually automatically, when you point it to that backend repository, it will generate question and answer pairs automatically. There are some settings which I'll show you, but that's essentially what you do. And it's pretty basic in that it sees structure, parses information, and says, I see a question, I see an answer. I see a question, I see an answer. You then have the ability in that knowledge base to do some further curation to say, well, you found this question, let me type up some additional variations of that question that still lead to the same answer. So you can do some of that as well to update some of the question and answer pairs to again fit your needs. Once you've used the QAMaker, right, you have many different ways of exposing, publishing that chatbot that was a result of the QAMaker. So that concept is called a channel, and you can create multiple channels. Now, don't confuse this channel with channels instead of teams. I know they're called the same, but they're two different things. But these channels could be basically teams, could be one of those channels. Could be basically a embed tag, where basically all it'll do is generate a bunch of embed code that you can go put, paste it on your external website, and voila, you now have a chatbot on external facing website as well, right? Or you can actually even have this go to a third-party set of services like Facebook, Jira, Trello. There's a list of like 10 or 15 different third-party apps. We can publish this chatbot to that third-party service as well, right? So a lot of times organizations will have their own corporate Facebook group, right? So you could actually post this chatbot that you create on those third-party services as well, right? So that's the crux of that bot framework. But here's the thing: at the end of the day, this QAMaker is pretty basic in that it strictly works in the boundaries of the knowledge base that you give it, and it's just doing very basic. Here's what I found. Here's the question. Here's the answer. That's sort of my little tunnel vision. That's all I see. I'm not going to see anything else, kind of a thing, right? That's a great place to start. But that's not enough. What if my questions are of a different kind, different flavor? Perfect example, think HR. I create an HR bot, new employee onboarding. You have questions about benefits or HR stuff. I'm going to put you in a team for onboarding, throw this bot at you and say, any question that you have, ask the bot, things like that, right? Think of a scenario where you have some FAQ documentation on paternity benefits and maternity benefits, right? So you got paternity benefits, you got maternity benefits, and you got plenty of documentation on what comes as in terms of paternity or maternity. But what if the question is not paternity or maternity, but it's parental? So the question comes from the end user: what are the parental benefits in this organization? Suddenly, this QAMaker is like, I see benefits. So maybe it's this answer, and that's where it stops, because it does not know how to respond to the term parental, which is related to paternity and maternity, but it doesn't know that because it doesn't have that information in that FAQ that you provided it, right? That's where in this progression of chatbots, you can basically say, I can integrate Lewis. What is Lewis? It is our natural language processing engine and allows you to provide a little bit more intelligence to this chatbot, right? So you can basically say, well, okay, if this is an HR bot, I'm going to essentially generate something called as an intent, right? And what an intent does is basically says, I can define scenarios for FAQ information that I'm generating. If this is HR, I'm going to say, here's some information around how you should handle requests coming around parental benefits. What in terms of a question that you can't find an answer for, here's an escalation path where I can trigger a Power Automate flow that goes and triggers a new message request to a real human. Do some kind of error tracking, like, hey, I can't find this error, this information in my repository. Instead of giving you a very basic answer not found message, I can do some additional customizations to it and things like that, right? Basically, the ability for the bot to do a better job of understanding questions in a natural language format and giving them back a more meaningful response instead of just like a semantic, I couldn't find what you're looking for kind of a thing, right? So you're adding more intelligence to it. That's Lewis. So that's the next level of iteration you can do with chatbots. That once you start from a Q&A maker. The next level after that you could do is say, well, that's good. Now I need to expand my scope of what this chatbot can look for in terms of information. In the Q&A maker, I'm providing the knowledge base. That's great, but that's not good enough. I need to expand it to maybe file shares, right? So you can then start leveraging Azure Search, right? Where all you're doing there is applying or enabling search capabilities in the chatbot, where the bot itself can search for information in a set of repositories that are already pre-configured in Azure Search. So you're leveraging the Azure Search Fabric to crawl this information and look for something in the search index and then pull it back inside of the chatbot context itself. This scenario becomes especially critical when you're looking at something that's beyond just a typical FAQ bot, right? This is more about, hey, we got product SKUs in our company. The product SKUs are maintained in the SQL database, right? That's sitting in Azure or Cosmos DB or whatever that might be. And I need data coming from that, right? So I should be able to type up, give me information about all the products that have been purchased by customer X, and getting a predefined set of results that are coming from a search index that's managed by Azure, right? That's the kind of use case where that Azure search functionality will start making sense, right? The fourth piece of this is cognitive services. So I'm assuming you all know what Azure Cognitive Services are, but if you aren't, it's basically our AI platform in that all our machine learning models for different scenarios are all bundled under this umbrella called cognitive services. So you have things like handwriting recognition, image recognition, forms processing. Man, I'm blanking out right now. There are like 6 or 7, and I'll post that information as well in the chat window towards the end. But there's a list of 6 or 7 different services that I can do to do some intelligence on unstructured pieces of information. What that means is, think about this. I have a use case. Think again, maybe the scenario is building a chatbot for your sales teams. And all the information is either in a structured format, like a SharePoint or SQL database of some kind, but could also be in an unstructured format, in a form of a PDF, like an image on a PDF, or a photograph that was taken of something that was in a manufacturing floor, something like that, right? It's in an unstructured state. How can you have this chatbot actually apply some cognitive intelligence on an unstructured piece of information, extract the data in the form of JSON, and start presenting that data in a chatbot interface for users to interact with it? So that's a cognitive piece of it, right? So you can see throughout this process, I'm going in layers. I start with something very basic over here with Q&A Maker, build it, productionalize it, it's in use, and I can build on top of it, right? I can go here, go here, go here on an as needed basis. I don't have to build it all in one day. Start small and work my way in. That's the beauty of this whole bot framework. I can go in layers, I can skip layers sometimes, right? It all depends on my needs. The last piece is I can actually take a Q&A maker over here, skip everything below it, and say, you know what, we are already fully invested in the Power Platform, right? I can go directly from Q&A maker, leverage the service in our Power Platform called Power Virtual Agents, and publish that inside of Teams as well, right? So basically I can say I am creating a virtual agent and I am starting off not from scratch, but I'm actually importing my QAMaker chatbot and then building additional branching logic and things like that instead of my virtual agent, right? So where I would have done Lois, I would have done Azure Search or Cognitive Services. That's when you're getting the heavy coding right now, right? But if you want to stay in this sort of low code way of doing things, you would go from a QAMaker into virtual agent, do all your intelligence there, your branching there, because all Power Virtual Agents is doing behind the scenes is still doing all those things, but it's leveraging Power Automate, right? So Power Virtual Agents is actually, if I can go back a bit, it's leveraging Power Automate that allows you to invoke those cognitive services and things like that, right? So that's another sort of low code way of essentially doing the same thing, right? The whole idea here, and Microsoft has been notorious for it, for better or for worse, which is to give you more options, right? There is never a prescriptive approach for anything. It's about saying you have these tools, use them the way you see fit, right? So that's the whole point over here with this piece, is to say that if I'm trying to go from a very simplistic bot into a more complex bot, I can go two ways. Go the Power Virtual Agents route, or go the route of doing Lois, doing Azure Cognitive Search and things like that. And then depending on what I want to do after that, I can expose it in each of these individual channels, right? If that makes sense. Any questions on this piece before we proceed to the actual demo piece of this? Cool. All right. So how do you start, right, for a QAMaker? It's actually quite simple. So QAMaker.ai, that's the URL. I'll post this in the chat window as well for your reference. But that's where you start. You'll have a sign in button in the top right corner. You sign in, and then you basically are going to see a page like this. Now, here's a big assumption, right? Is that if you're going to do this, the assumption is your Azure AD identity has been assigned to a subscription that your organization owns. So you have to have a subscription in Azure that your account is tied with in order for you to leverage the service, right? So that's one big prerequisite. And I'll post all the documentation that's actually on our docs.microsoft.com website that will walk you through step by step of how to do this, right? It talks about prerequisites and everything. But that's the big one right there, is for you to have a subscription that you're assigned to. Once you go there, which basically is a page that looks like this, right? The next piece is, well, I need to create a knowledge base, right? That's the first step. So what I'll do is over here, I click on create a knowledge base. It'll say, yep, okay. Well, first you have to create a Q&A service. So you go and create a new Q&A service, which it'll take you to the Azure portal. So it'll switch you over directly over there. And then you will go ahead and spin up a new Q&A service instance inside of your Azure portal. Now, this is where, again, I won't go into the details of how to do this in Azure. It's pretty straightforward. Click and click, 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 click. You know, I'm assuming your organization already has resource groups that they already manage. So just working with your Azure team, infrastructure team on leveraging what's the right resource group to use, what's the right network security group to use, things like that, right? So we won't get into those details. But essentially what you do is you define those. You have this option over here to define the pricing tier. And so this is where by default, you have the option of the free service for the knowledge base, which is basically, if you all can see this, I can define 3 managed documents. What does that mean? 3 managed documents per month is basically saying, to generate the knowledge base, I'm defining 3 data sources that I can use on a monthly basis, and that's how I get charged. So if it's just 3, you can use a free one, not a problem. If your data sources are sort of unlimited, meaning I could have many, I have no idea. That's when you get into the standard S0, where it's basically $10 per month, right? Then you go into the search details, right? This is still leveraging an aspect of search. So you define the region, and then you also have over here different sizes of search index. So if you all are familiar with the SharePoint search ecosystem, right, from back in the day, you build indexes, right, and you define your search servers and things like that. So very similar concept. You're defining how many search indexers do I need, the free tier, the basic tier, and each tier as you go higher and higher. You would do that if you want better performance because your data set is larger that it's crawling against. If it's a pretty basic FAQ, you don't need massive indexes. You can probably even get away with a free index, right? So again, it's just a matter of playing around and testing performance. And then you have the ability, right? You can start small and say, you know what, this isn't cutting it. You can come back in here, change the settings, right? So it's very flippable, easy to switch things around, right? Give details on the app service name. So this bot service runs as an app in Azure, right? So it uses the app secret, app passcode, things like that. So it's got a much more robust security model. I don't know how many of you are actually played around with app passwords and app secrets, but it's a much better way of managing security for apps where you're not actually defining dedicated service accounts that have username passwords, because that also makes you vulnerable to elevation privilege attacks. Makes you vulnerable to man-in-the-middle attacks, things like that. So much better way of doing it this way, right? Define the app name. You can define the region where this service needs to run. So west, east to west. Again, depending on, again, how your subscription is configured by your Azure administrators, you'll probably have different options, right? App Insights is nothing but getting reporting on the operations of the service, uptime, downtime, performance, concurrent users, that kind of stuff. That's App Insights, right? You walk through all this, you review and create. When you hit the create button, it's going to actually create this whole service. I'm not going to go ahead and do that because I already have one. So you'll see once you go through that process, you come back to this screen, hit the refresh button, because now we've created the service and this website needs to do an asynchronous load of everything that you've created. So this should load in just a second. You define your Azure Active Directory, which in my case is Microsoft. I'm going to pick the subscription. So I have one called Azure Internal Access. Once I go to that subscription, it will now automatically say, hey, I found a Q&A service. Fantastic. The one that we just created, by the way, right? I define language, which is English. I give it a name. So I can give it a name called testing bot for teams. That's my name. And then this is the piece over here. How do you populate the knowledge base? So as we talked about earlier, this is a piece where you say, what's the data source? The data source could be a website, could be a file. So the file could be a Word document, could be an Excel document, could be a PDF. Basically, all it needs is a document that has information in a question and answer format. Essentially, that's all it needs. So I'll give you an example. I found an internal, actually not even internal, it's a public-facing FAQ page that Microsoft posted around our Surface devices, right? So I just picked that URL, I found it on the web, and it's basically structured in the same way, like any typical FAQ page, right? In fact, I remember I did something similar, and I'll actually show you this around the FAQ page for the IRS website, right? So I actually took this page, and you see how this is structured, with different accordions and things like that. That's essentially all it needs. So I could, in theory, in fact, you know what? I'm going to grab this page. Go in here. Oh, wrong. Here we go. I'm actually going to post this URL, right? It's an external facing website. Could be internal too, right? But in this case, it's an external one. So I'm going to do that. Then here's the next piece, chit chat. So when the person first loads the bot, what kind of personality do you want to give this bot? You can say none, where it doesn't do any small talk. Professional, keeps it very professional. Chit chat, friendly, witty, caring. I would say be cautious about using the witty chit chat personality, because some of the questions, some of the chit chat that it starts doing, you may think, I don't know if I want to do this kind of thing, right? Just a gentle word of caution. It's all good. Everything is safe for work, but just different cultures handle it differently. So you can pick and choose and play around with what questions get pre-added That's all it's doing over here. In this personality, it's basically preloading a bunch of Q&A pairs on top of what it already finds. I'm going to keep it professional. Actually, you know what? I'm going to pick enthusiastic just to see what it looks like. So I've done this. I've defined my data source. I've given it a name, tied it to my subscription. I'm going to hit create. Right. So what it's doing right now, as you can see, right? If I can zoom in, crawl your content, it's crawling your content, extracting Q&A pairs, and creating the knowledge base, which looks like it's already done. Check this out. How do I notify the IRS that my address has changed? That's the question. And here's the answer it found. All of this from this website. How do I notify the IRS my address has been changed? It took all this tabular data and converted it into basic text right here. And it's retained all the rich text formatting, the categories, subcategories, hyperlinks, all of that good stuff. Good thing here also is you can start doing alternative phrasing. So you can say this question's fine. Maybe you can add an additional question that says, how do I change my address so the IRS can know it? Oh, what happened? Sorry, can know it, right? So provide additional questions. I can go in here on the answer, and when I get this answer, I can create a follow-up prompt and say, would you like for me to redirect you the address change form, right? And if the answer is yes, I can post a link to that address change form as part of my follow-up to that answer when somebody asks me a question. I can do those kind of things as well. But again, if you think about what I'm doing here, it's very prescriptive. I am literally telling the bot how to behave. It's not doing any intelligence on that. It's literally following my directions. All my directions are right here, and it's literally following those to the T. That's all it's doing. So you can see it's found all these questions. And as I keep scrolling, you'll keep seeing that it's found a lot of pages of those questions. So it's generated those questions in that knowledge base. And then at the very end, you see all the chit chat stuff that it added as well. I feel peckish is something I could type and would say, maybe it's time for a snack, right? So this is that enthusiastic pieces of I was saying earlier, where somebody says, hey, I'm lazy. Well, all right, what do you want to do about that, right? So all this is extra. You don't need it, but depending on the organization that you are, your culture, things like that, you can add a bit of fun to your bot, right? Things like that. Anyways, so that's that stuff. I think that looks good. I'm going to hit the save button because I made some changes, and I'm going to train the model on my changes. So I'm training this chatbot on the changes that I just made, which again, mine were pretty trivial, so it shouldn't be too long. In fact, it's done. Then I go into settings, reconfirm, everything looks good. Name, language, the URL, things like that. Multi-turn extraction is something that's really cool that basically says, depending on a certain response that I get in the chatbot or a certain question I get in my chatbot, I can actually redirect you to another repository and another knowledge base if I so choose to, right? If you're doing something like that, that's when you would do a multi-turn extraction, multiple turns essentially, or you can keep it very prescriptive, very much in a serial order, right? Boom, 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 that kind of stuff, right? Anyway, so you do this, you say it looks good, right? And then you hit the publish button. Pretty simple, right? So I'll hit the publish button. Actually, I show you something else first. My bad. All right. So you can see that if you're using Postman or curl today to interact and do additional customizations with this chatbot, you just test functionality, right, against this chatbot. You can, here's the embed code that you would put inside of your Postman client, and start testing. Or you can go back to your knowledge base and actually test your bot right here. So we went in here. I'll pull up the test, and then right here, I can now start interacting with my chatbot. So I can say things like address change is my question. And you'll see, just to test if this bot is in fact working, right? There it is. I found the answer, right? There are several ways to tell us, and it's basically this first answer. I could go pick another answer, right? I can say things like household filing status information. And same thing, very prescriptive. If it finds a match, it will say, yep, we found the match. Here's the answer. Where's my, oops, I'm scrolling the wrong section. Hang on. Here we go. Household filing status information. Here's the information that I got from this answer, right? And you have the ability to inspect what exactly happened, right? So here's a question that was found, and here's the appropriate answer that it found for you, the confidence score. So you have the ability, this is where you start customizing, right? You can say, based on the confidence score, I can use that as a trigger to do additional things now. So I can start writing a Power Automate against this that says, if the confidence score is less than 70, go do something else. Maybe go start a new message in Teams with my tax specialist in my organization, right? So you can take this and do a handoff to a real person in Teams. So this is where you can start getting a little creative with these solutions, right? All of this, as you can see so far, zero code, right? And that's the beauty of this. So you can take all this, you say, you know what, this looks great. So you published it. Next up, what you do is you switch over to Teams. So this is my Teams client. So this is my Microsoft tenant. So you'll see a lot of stuff that's actually real. So you can ignore the first thing you need after a chatbot has been published is now you can say, you're saying, okay, I have this. How do I bring it inside of Teams? So I'm assuming you all are familiar with this app. Sorry. Yeah, you're familiar with this app called the App Studio. If you're not, App Studio is basically an app inside of Teams that allows you to create app for Teams, right? It's actually a really cool app because, again, you don't have to worry about pulling up Visual Studio, which I'm sure most of your devs, so you actually probably enjoy using Visual Studio. But remember, I am not a developer, so I don't want to even pull up Visual Studio. The only time I do that is if I'm doing PowerShell, and I'm using Visual Studio Code for that. But this is my way of actually creating an app based on a chatbot and packaging it up inside of Teams. So what you do is you install the App Studio, which if you don't have it, you go to Apps instead of Teams, and over here, search for App Studio. It's a Microsoft app. So again, there's the only prerequisite here, I would say, is that if your organization has blocked certain apps, so make sure they've allowed Microsoft apps at least, because then you can install this app, right? So you install the app's over here now, right? In the manifest editor, this is where you get to play around with this, right? So you'll see I already have a bot over here called the IRS bot. So I actually did this as part of a session with a customer where I actually showed them I can do this in an hour, end to end, right? Build a whole new chatbot, put it in Teams in an hour. And that's what we did. But if you see over here, instead of this IRS bot, you get so many details. Provide the app details of if I'm going to post this chatbot instead of Teams, what should it look like? The short name is IRS bot. That's what you see on the icon for the app itself. Here's the full details of the app itself. The app ID is something that you get out of the Azure portal. So when you when you publish the app in Azure, it generates an app ID. So that app ID, you grab it from there and paste it here. Give it a package name. You can start doing versioning, things like that. Short description, right? Pretty straightforward. Developer name, developer website, all that good stuff. Privacy statement URL, terms of use URL. what logo or what logo do you want for your image? Full color, transparent, accent color, all that good stuff, right? Do you want this app to run in full screen mode? All that good stuff. From the capability perspective, how do you want this bot to be interacting with your team's app? Do I want this bot just be as a native bot itself, or do I want this bot, now going back to that other slide I showed you where you have those 6 options, those options start to make sense over here now, right? Am I building the bot and integrating it as a tab, right? If so, I can define those tabs. I can say, is it a team tab? Right, or can I make it a personal tab where it's more of a personal per user basis kind of a thing? In this case, it's probably you want to make it be as a team tab, right, so that everybody can access it. Do you want it to work as a connector so that other developers can start leveraging it? Again, the use cases vary, right? So you wouldn't do it in this case. Or you want to use it as a messaging extension so that the IRS bot is not just an app, but it also sits as something that's sitting in your extensions as well in the bottom. So you can take all those things, define the languages, configure the domains. This is from a security standpoint, right? Which domains are allowed to be accessed by this bot, things like that. Your app ID and your app secret. These are, again, things that you get from the Azure portal that you just paste them here. You can define consent, right? Which you should, meaning you can have the users be fully aware of what level of access their bot will be taking on their profile information, things like that. Single sign-on configurations, you guys get that piece of it. And then ultimately, what you do is you, as a developer, can directly install this app. And what it's doing there is essentially side-loading this app for you in your Teams client, just for you. So this is, again, only for troubleshooting purposes or testing purposes. Depending on your Teams configuration, this option might be blocked, right? I know for Teams configuration, we can block the ability to sideload apps. But what you can do is then also to do the download button, where it generates the app package for you. And this is why this is important. Now that you've generated the app package is what you provide to your Teams administrator so that they can upload it to the Teams app store and then now publish this app as an app that's going to be a company-wide internal only app instead of Teams. So that going forward, when somebody goes in here instead of apps, right, I can see like how it says built for Microsoft. You would have something that's built for your organization. So all those apps will now start showing up here. So your app, once it's been uploaded, will show up over here. So you upload that, right? And you can actually have it be pre-configured such that the new Chatbot app gets pre-installed and shows up on this left rail. I can basically say my IRS bot, where's my IRS bot? Here we go. Needs to be over here. I can actually do that. Now that I pull up the app, this app is nothing but my bot, right? So here it is, the Chatbot now exposed as an application instead of Teams, the same stuff, right? The stuff that I tested before. I can go in here and say head of household, right? And it's going to interact in the exact same fashion, where it's going to pull, it's still loading, so this is like delay. But it's going to find the information and then post that as a reply back to my message. So taking longer than usual. That's interesting. But that in a nutshell, and I know kind of skipped and I'm running over already by a minute, but that in a nutshell is how you build a QAMaker based chatbot and then publish it inside of Teams and interact with it inside of Teams. Any questions? No questions? Was this something that you see as being of value within your organization? Can you folks think of any use cases when this will apply?
I do. I mean, we have, we have those kind of frequently asked question things on our portal, and I think this would allow us to demonstrate the ability to be able to make them interactive.
Excellent. Yeah, and that's the thing about this. Here we go. Just took a while for it to spin up. So yeah, I mean that's where you start, right? And then you can, as you start using it, you'll be like, oh, can I actually improve this? Can I make this better? Can I do this? Can I do that? That's where the fun starts. Integration with Power Automate, especially, is huge. Integration with Logic Apps, if you're going down that path, right? Just a lot of opportunity after that. This literally, right? In an hour or two, you can get a whole bot fully going and publish inside of Teams. That's what I love the most. In fact, that was my original plan, is to actually go through that whole process in this session. But then I also realized I should probably step back a bit and actually explain what I'm doing before I do it, right? So, Jonah, do you have a question?
Yeah. So this is like for potentially like onboarding or something like that. But could you show how you do it with like maybe you said like another database or data set? Like for instance, maybe one document's for onboarding questions, but maybe another one's for, like you said, like maternity leave or parental stuff.
Yeah, that will take a little bit more time, Jono. I don't know if I can do that in the time that we have today. I know Becky has some stuff to show you, but how about I do this? I will share some information to you on how to do Lewis, because that's the part I was telling you. You have to define intent, right? So there's it's a bit more intensive than what I just showed you, right? I'll run out of time if I do that. But let me send you some information on it. Maybe we can chat offline, and I'm happy to, get you the information you need on how do you do that kind of stuff as well.